do want to ask John. He covered the NBA, and he has covered the NFL for the last, 20 years or so. John, which guy has bigger stature, the NFL MVP or the NBA MVP?
I think the NBA MVP. I think always the NBA is about marketing individuals. They've been ahead of the curve of the other sports for a long time when it comes to that. So always the biggest NBA stars are the biggest stars in sports, at least in North America. You could argue soccer in Europe or football over there, but they've always done a good job with that, whereas the NFL is about, as Jerry Seinfeld would say, it's about the laundry. It's about the uniform more than the players. People root for the Philadelphia Eagles, whether it's Donovan McNabb, Carson Wentz, Nick Foles. It's Eagles, Eagles, Eagles more than the individual.
Right. We were kind of discussing whether or not, a guy of Carson Wentz's stature, if he was the NFL MVP, is that enough of a recruiting pitch to a guy like a LeBron James? Like, would LeBron be like, wow, the NFL MVP is recruiting me? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I don't think so. Everything I've heard from my NBA people that I still talk to is that LeBron, if he's going anywhere, it's probably going to be Los Angeles, simply because he lives out there. You have the Hollywood aspect of it, and he wants to get involved more with the entertainment industry. So I think it's about bigger things for him, and he's the biggest star in the world. He's not going to be, taken aback.
Is he a bigger star than Sam Hunt?
My point is, it doesn't matter how big somebody is in an individual city. They're not bigger than LeBron James. So
right.
He's not going to be starry-eyed by anybody, unless maybe it is a Hollywood star. Ultimately, I think it's pretty clear to me, at least, that's what seems to be shaking down. Obviously, he doesn't want to go there if there's no opportunity to win. So the Lakers have to do some other things. And if they're able to get Kawhi Leonard, then I would say it's a fait accompli. But I hope I'm wrong, and I certainly hope the greatest basketball player I've ever seen plays in Philadelphia, but I just don't see it.
We'll all find out in a couple of days, I guess. We'll all have to wait and see. I want to get your take. Number one, Jameis Winston officially has been suspended for 3 games for violating the league's personal conduct policy. And I guess the big thing is, he gets 3 games. You get guys who, Josh Brown 1 game. Tom Brady 4 games, Martavius Bryant a full season for smoking marijuana. I mean, it seems like things are out of whack in that league, as we already know. But 3 games verified, Jameis Winston.
Yeah, and that's what was reported, and it likely was a deal that he agreed to accept without appeal, knocked it down from 6 games. I just tweeted about that. I realized it's low-hanging fruit for a lot of people, and it seems silly on the surface. Somebody gets suspended for a full season for smoking marijuana. But understand a couple things. That's failing multiple tests. Number one, that's not like one failure, and you're out for 16 games. And then the second part is, through collective bargaining, substance abuse and performance-enhancing drug suspensions are structured. There is no wiggle room. It is clearly defined in the CBA, whereas the personal conduct side of it, there is no structure. And you could, it is silly, I agree with that, but that's the reality. It's up to the whim of essentially one man. And that's been the problem with the consistency of personal conduct suspensions and everyone getting up. But when people try to take the next step and say the NFL is advocating domestic violence or saying marijuana is worse than domestic violence, that's not fair. That's not true. And most of those reporters understand those suspensions are structured, as I said, and there is no wiggle room.
John, next question, right? We're going to see Drew Rosenhaus around the NovaCare complex a little bit more, it seems. But before we get to that, why don't we hear so much more about NFL suspensions with players failing the drug test than we do the NBA? I mean, does the NBA handle this more internally to avoid that bad PR, or better internally than the NFL?
No, I don't think it's necessarily that. I think it is a situation where there's a lot of people in the NFL and the NBA, for that matter, that smoke marijuana. It's a very easy policy to beat, and you only have to pass one test a year. You know the clearly defined windows. So it's not like the NFL is bending over backwards to suspend people. Guys who get caught up in that substance abuse policy when it comes to marijuana are guys who have a significant issue and can't stop. Because I'm telling you guys, I know them personally. You would be stunned how many people smoke marijuana in the NFL, never have an issue. It's an easy test to beat. So I don't spend much time hand-wringing and saying, these guys are being treated unfairly. You have to fail 4 different tests to even get into the first level of being fined and suspended. Never mind being suspended for a year.
Would I really be surprised about how many people are smoking marijuana in the NFL?
Well, I should say,
what player isn't?
I'd be more surprised if you told me this man wasn't smoking marijuana.
Well, and that's the point. And think about how many guys go through their entire careers with no issue. In fact, Michael Bennett, the new Eagles defensive lineman, who is currently on a book tour for his book, and I put this on YouTube. He had a large discussion. He went back to Seattle. And the last question they asked him is, how are you handling your body when it comes to CTE and the effects of that down the line? And he joked and he said, I can't tell you because I'd be suspended. In other words, Michael's been doing it for years and years and years, never suspended. That is the point I'm trying to get across. Most players do it and don't have an issue because it's a simple test to beat. So I can't feel that bad for guys who have a tough time beating something that they give you the answer key. They said, just don't smoke it here, and then you're free to go rest of the year.
John McMullen with us, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider, covers the league nationally as well. And, John, I tipped my joke a little bit earlier when I said next question. Drew Rosenhaus has been hired by Ajayi. He's changed agents to go from Select Sports Group to a more high-profile guy. There's probably nobody more high-profile than Drew Rosenhaus, right? What are we to read into Ajayi switching to Drew Rosenhaus as his representation now?
Well, I don't know if you read something into it. He's in the contract year. This is his last year on this rookie deal. He plays a position that's been devalued. He's got some other issues as far as the degenerative knee condition. When you talk about the Eagles, you got to worry about salary cap issues. So he's got a lot of things he's got to overcome to get a big-time contract from the Eagles. And, hey, I've said before, I think even if he has a big year, I'm not sure the Eagles are going to want him back because of that knee condition, because of how much he's going to cost, and because of how much they like Corey Clement. And if we fast forward 1 year, he might be ready to take over the lead back role. So in a lot of ways, I look at this as a lame duck year for Ajayi in Philadelphia. But he's going to be fighting for a contract somewhere. And obviously he feels more comfortable with Drew Rosenhaus getting him the best deal possible.
As you know, John, there was a period of time where Rosenhaus was sort of persona non grata around South Philadelphia. He had to kind of sneak in where he could find his windows. Has that changed now, or are the Eagles and him on a good place now?
Yeah, I think they are. He has quite a few Eagles in his portfolio. Nigel Bradham, one of them. Obviously, he had no issues and signed a very, if anything, team-friendly contract. in the offseason. Guys like Jalen Mills, who are highly thought of by this organization, are Drew Rosenhaus clients. Derek Barnett's a Drew Rosenhaus guy. So, yeah, the days of T.O. and next question, I mean, that was all more than Drew, it was T.O., let's be honest. Nobody gets along with Terrell Owens except maybe Julio Jones.
Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN here at the Hard Rock on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Johnny Mack is with us talking some NFL. All right, the Eagles are the Super Bowl champions. Two teams every day trying to chase the Eagles. Today we're looking at Denver and the San Francisco 49ers. Now, 49ers, interesting. Many people thought or liking them. Denver was a Super Bowl champion just a couple of years ago, so you got a lot of people that like that team. But new quarterback out there, Case Keenum, is in Denver. So are they settled in at the quarterback position finally?
Well, I don't know if you call it settled. They're certainly settled for this season. But, I mean, you have to see what Case Keenum shows up. There's a reason he had that kind of year in Minnesota and the Vikings went in a different direction because they didn't necessarily believe what they were seeing. And I think a lot of people are in that category. In Denver, obviously has had major issues since Peyton Manning retired. I think where it does help is very similar to Minnesota. If you look at the Vikings roster, it's very talented, very deep, but their biggest weakness remains the offensive line. And Case Keenum is more athletic than people think. He extends plays. He's got sort of a natural ability to do that. And he'll face a similar situation in Denver. They have a bad offensive line from last year, and he's the kind of quarterback that can mask that a little bit. So I do think it's a good fit for the Broncos. But, I mean, if it's the L.A. Rams version of Case Keenum versus the Vikings version, no one's going to like that.
Oh, well, real quick on that. Last year he's in Minnesota. Now he's in Denver. Would you say he has better weapons in Denver or Minnesota to help him be the best quarterback he can be?
Oh, well, God, no. I mean, the Vikings have better weapons. The Vikings have arguably the best receiving duo in the NFL. They have Dalvin Cook returning. Last year they had Jerick McKinnon, who interestingly is now on the 49ers. Latavius Murray, they have a good tight end. Broncos have sort of fell back to the pack since their days. They have big names at receiver. If you think about Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, but if you want to be realistic, Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs are much better. They don't have a running game. And so, yeah, he's taken a step backward from a weapon situation.
Now, John, you say they don't have a running game. What do you think of this rookie Royce Freeman that they picked up in the draft? And could that finally be their answer to looking for a feature back? I know the Broncos are high on him.
Well, I mean, yeah, you can find running backs, and we all know that. Last year, Kareem Hunt, obviously, in Kansas City. They also have Devontae Booker. So it'll be one of those situations where they'll look at a couple young backs and say, whoever gets the hot hand, very similar to how they did it here in Philadelphia. I don't see anybody sort of seizing control of that. I don't think there's an Ezekiel Elliott there. So it is going to be a true competition. But on paper, it doesn't look good in their backfield.
It's John Elway's birthday today, John McMullen. He's 58 years old today. We all know the impact that he had on the Broncos as a player, but what impact and what grade would you give him, or what impact do you think he's had as an executive and as the GM?
Well, I think any time you earn a Super Bowl, you should have a little rope. But I think, his status right now is sort of something Howie Roseman should take a look at, because things can change drastically. You're talking about a guy who built a Super Bowl team, and all of a sudden now people are asking questions, and what is he doing? And did he hire the right coach? And he can't get a quarterback. It's been, Trevor Siemian and Brock Osweiler and Paxton Lynch, and now it's Case Keenum. So I wouldn't say it's a hot seat, because John Elway is obviously a god in Denver, and he should be as both a player and executive. But people are starting to ask questions.
Talking with John McMullen here on the Sports Bash. When we think Denver, we used to think defense. So what are they looking like on that side of the ball?
Well, it's not as good as it was. And I think the biggest maybe the biggest thing, everyone talks about quarterback and their inability to find the heir apparent to Manning Phillips, man. And I think that was the biggest mistake of going to Vance Joseph, who's a defensive-minded head coach. Because obviously, if you hire a defensive-minded head coach, the coordinator's going to go. And that's what happened. And I always say when we talked about the Rams, and you see how quickly Wade has turned that around the Rams' fortunes, he might not be a great head coach, but this is one of the top defensive coordinators of all time, Wade Phillips. So that was, to me, the biggest mistake. I would have hired an offensive coach and kept Wade Phillips there. They still have Von Miller. They still have Chris Harris. They lost Khalid, but they have Bradley Roby. They brought in Bradley Chubb. So they have pieces, but they don't have Wade Phillips.
All right, let's go to San Francisco. Everyone's talking about Jimmy Garoppolo. Too much hype, or is this guy the real deal?
Yeah, it's too much hype. I mean, it's not his fault. I mean, all he does is win games. I think 7-0 at this point. But let's face it, that's a small sample size. As you point out, remember, when he took over the 49ers last year and he won the 5 games, there was no pressure on him. That team was dead and buried. They were one of the worst teams in football. And nobody's game planning for him, and he sort of caught people by surprise. Now, all of a sudden, everybody's got the offseason. Everybody's looking at Jimmy Garoppolo film. Everybody's going to be designing things to stop him. And, oh, by the way, we just talked about the lack of talent Denver has at the skill position. There's not a lot of talent San Francisco has at the skill position. So I think it's going to be much more difficult for him.
Although Jerry Rice did come out and say that he could play football today if he could.
Well, he probably could in that receiving crew. I mean, they have Pierre Garçon, who he is what he is. He's a good receiver, but, you know, this is his 11th or 12th year. In his heyday, he was a possession receiver, so obviously he remains that. He's a very good possession receiver. And then you have Marquise Goodwin, who's the speed threat. But there aren't – those guys are not top-tier receivers. You know, we just talked about Thielen. Forget about guys like Julio Jones and Antonio Brown. True number one receivers in this league. The 49ers don't have much at that position.
You know, John, you talked about Denver and having some issues on the line. The Niners might be in the opposite direction, at least in the fact that they re-signed or extended that guard, Laken Tomlinson. What does he bring to the table? And then their top draft pick, too, the kid out of Notre Dame, right? They're obviously looking to bolster their line and improve their line moving forward.
Yeah, they had to, and they were another team, and that seems to be sort of a theme with bad teams in this league is bad offensive lines, and they were one of them. And they did a lot. You mentioned Mike McGlinchey, top 10 pick. You have Joe Staley. So now they should have a couple of good tackles. They signed Weston Richburg from the Giants to get a center. You mentioned Tomlinson. So they are getting better, and it should be a vast improvement from where they have been. I don't think that will be the death knell to them again. I think it'll be an average to above average line, and they certainly improve things great.
They open up at the Vikings. Any key games on the Niners schedule that jump out at you as must win to get them respectability, so to speak?
Well, I think a lot of people are going to look at that opener and say, because that's obviously a very good team, and that'll be a take your temperature game and say, are the 49ers really much improved? Can they deal with a team like that? Not necessarily win, but at least take it down to the fourth quarter, make it a one-score game with 3 or 4 minutes left. If they can do that, I think it'll open some people's eyes. And it's interesting because their bell cow back this year is going to be Jerick McKinnon, who was the ex-Vikings back, is sort of a change of pace guy there, though. And it'll be interesting to see if he can go from being a guy who gets 130, 140 touches to somebody who gets over 200. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case.
He is John McMullen, our Eagles insider on 97.3 ESPN.com, and covers the league nationally as well. Joins us each day at this time. He's been with us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, guys.